very much. This is great. These are our friends. We have thousands of friends on this incredible movement. This was a movement like nobody's ever seen before.
Well, what a week. Trump has just won the election fairly after being convicted by the justice system, nearly assassinated, and after previously attempting a coup d'etat before leaving office, refusing to acknowledge Biden's victory 4 years ago. The good news is that Melania is back, and God, I miss her. The bad news is that the empire has just voted Nero again, and its citizens declare themselves oblivious, belonging to a society that can no longer see its own problems, blinded by screens, evangelism, YouTube, and TikTok. What is clear is that the lid has been put on the tomb of identity politics, as it was the Hispanics and black men who made the difference in favor of Trump, turning their backs on Kamala Harris, with whom they didn't identify, and even worse, with whom they felt emasculated. The patriarchy has just expressed its discontent with feminism that no longer does its dirty work. I mean, the patriarchy's dirty work. And the public sphere is advancing over individual bodies, which, as we saw this week, are absolutely unprotected.
Los reyes de España, Felipe VI y Leticia, fueron recibidos el domingo con insultos en su visita a Paiporta, un municipio de Valencia duramente golpeado por las inundaciones del martes. Una población desesperada y furiosa insultó y lanzó barro al presidente del gobierno español Pedro Sánchez y a los reyes al grito de «asesinos». Con Sánchez evacuado por su equipo de seguridad y el presidente regional valenciano Carlos Masón también fuera de la vista a mitad de la visita, los reyes insistieron durante bastante rato en dialogar con la gente, pero finalmente abandonaron el lugar. Los incidentes llevaron a las autoridades a suspender la visita de los reyes a una segunda localidad, Chiva.
This week's on the bad education or la mala educación, which is my weekly YouTube contribution, we're analyzing the recent backlash against King Philip VI and Queen Letizia by a desperate public after the floods in Valencia. We'll connect this to the role of the British monarchy, which today resembles a soap opera spectacle in a virtual world dominated by social media, platforms like TikTok or YouTube. These platforms fragment access to information and create a political agenda that, in a biased way, bolsters far-right interests. While this might sound conspirational, today's focus is on conspiracy theories surrounding the monarchy, which often end up with a racist slant. Ultimately, the current role of monarchies appears irrelevant, making it seem like this episode of La Mala Educación could be a wasted effort. However, the reality shows that monarchies, states with self-perpetuating and ineffective bureaucracies, and an intellectual class trapped in academic moralizations and subjected to market rules, are still significant forces. This leaves the intellectuals in a state of complicit paralysis or naive conviction that ultimately serves the right. In this 1931 painting by Diego Velázquez, housed in the National Gallery in London, King Philip IV of Spain, appears in an elegant silver grey suit with gold details and lace, in a majestic pose against a neutral background that emphasizes his figure. Stylistically, the painting foreshadows the Impressionist brushstroke and technique that gains meaning when understood in the context of the viewer's experience. Throughout the history of European courtly art, royal portraits faced a challenge, balancing the depiction of luxury through silks, insignias, and jewelry with an accurate representation of the monarch's body and face. Attempting to highlight both body and face equally could blur the individuality of the figure. After his 1629 trip to Italy, Velázquez encountered Venetian painting, especially Tintoretto's work, and learned to apply pigments in a way that, viewed from a distance, create a clear image. In Philip IV in Silver and Grey, Velázquez plays with the viewer's perception. The portrait comes together from afar, where the brushstrokes form the monarch's figure. Velázquez's technique here not only depicts the king, but also reinforces the symbolic distance between him and the viewer. This distance, inherent to monarchy, emphasizes the aura of mystery that elevates royalty to a higher place within the human hierarchy, serving as a symbolic gateway to the divine. In other words, the monarch is untouchable and remains in a realm of distant knowledge. In this self-portrait by Antonio Moro, or Anthony's Moro in Flemish, Antonio Moro in Spanish, the artist depicts himself in front of a blank canvas with a letter similar to the one in Philip IV hand in Velázquez's painting at the National Gallery. The difference is that while Velázquez portrays the king in full figure, Moro symbolizes his own exile from court after being banished for touching Philip II on the shoulder, thinking he was his friend. And the absolute king doesn't have any friend, he's absolute. The scenes of the Bourbon royals' visit to Valencia this week reveal two forms of desperation. That of the people, affected by the floods, and that of the monarchs themselves, affected by their position. In between lies the absence of Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister, who quickly withdrew the scene. The people were attacking Philip VI, while Letizia tried to calm the crowds who shouted, "Murderers, murderers!" As a descendant of Louis XVI of France, Philip VI faces echoes of the French Revolution and the same historical tension between the Spanish Habsburgs, ousted from Spain, and the Bourbons, whose legitimacy rests on the legacy of the Sun King and a belief in his near miraculous powers, like those attributed to Louis XIV. Unlike the Bourbons, the Habsburgs, beginning with Philip II, cultivated an image of seclusion and secrecy. Philip II constructed the Escorial near Madrid, a tradition Philip VI seems to embrace with a reserved profile until now that he did exactly the wrong thing. Meanwhile, in the British monarchy, King Charles III disinherited his brother, accused of pedophilia in the Epstein scandal, and removed his pension, turning the scandal into another chapter of the family's ongoing public saga. Plans were also discussed to streamline the nobility's title to create a leaner structure for the monarchy. However, health issues affecting the king himself, the Princess of Wales, and now Camilla Parker Bowles, who faces a potential infection or cancer diagnosis, have added tension. All of this has been amplified by the media and social platforms, building a narrative that seems to obscure deeper issues. A recent investigation by The Times newspaper revealed how the duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall initially created to fund the royal family, now operate almost like real estate agencies.
What Charles and William aren't telling you about their secret millions.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for paying your rent every now and then.
Their private estates, the Duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall, make Charles and William £50 million a year. But they have repeatedly refused to reveal exactly which properties they own.
Can we have a report on the list of properties?
I don't see why.
And details of how these estates make their staggering profits and from where have remained secret until now.
Wow.
God almighty.
But this is a really, really important revelation.
Thousands of documents obtained by dispatches reveal how hard up government departments, schools, and even the NHS are helping to keep the cash rolling in for Charles and William.
Using their privileged status to profit without public oversight and potential questionable tax exemptions. This raises a conflict of interest. The monarch, in his role as benefactor of charities, also benefits financially through renting out properties he owns, combining the roles of judge and beneficiary and casting doubts on the transparency of the British monarchy. But I'll get into the lessons learned this week by Felipe VI and Letizia, his queen of Spain, that the roles of, for example, in my country, my home country, Juan Perón and Evita, are meant only for those anointed by the people, and their influence lasts only as long as the election cycle. They lack the mystical, spectral mystery that every monarch needs to exist. Because when a monarch becomes flesh and blood, it turns into a Hollywood star. And when monarchy meets Hollywood, or in this case, royalty meets Hollywood, we see what happens, just as we have seen with Prince Harry and the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, who are now on the run due to Harry's reported drug use, which forces them to emigrate to Portugal because of their problem with visa issues in America, in Montecito. This total debacle of nobility and royalty has another underlying theme: social media. As I mentioned, YouTube's algorithms seem to align with debates on produced shows with real commentators and journalists who are clearly finding new access through this medium. However, almost without exception, they feed a simplistic narrative that fundamentally aims to defend royalty as a perpetual soap opera, attacking anything that threatens this soap opera, this narrative. For example, Meghan Markle, who in this framework of pure bloodlines is of a so-called, and I put this in heavy quotation marks, inferior race.
Princess Anne might have passed everyone by. And what's been the most surprising reaction to the royals down under? Welcome to Palace Confidential. I'm Jo Elvin, and on my panel today is the Mail on Sunday's royal correspondent Natasha Livingston, the paper's editor-at-large Charlotte Griffiths, and the Daily Mail's diary editor Richard Eden. Welcome to you all. Now, if you haven't seen Richard discuss William and Harry's fallout in forensic detail,
what we seem to be seeing behind all this is a political agenda, clearly not controlled by those on these shows, but by those behind the algorithms, pushing a demonization of immigration and an imposition of a moralizing, inquisitorial, and Manichaean ethic onto young people. Or to be more clear, the young people become the agents of that inquisition. They're not the target, They are the inquisitorial ones. This is the shocking thing. Of course, these YouTube programs will hardly be able to sustain this discourse, which is in some ways anarcho-capitalist, after the Times investigation. The Times had been systematically criticizing Harry and Meghan for trying to profit from their brand, something they failed to do due to their alleged laziness. But if we're talking about profit, the question is, how are things at home? And by home, I mean Buckingham Palace, with the businesses uncovered behind the Duchess of Lancaster and Cornwall. What's really emerging is a discourse of inclusion and exclusion, where inclusion and exclusion are based on standards of good manners and popularity similar to those in high school dramas like Glee. For example, it's reported and endlessly discussed that Meghan wasn't accepted by the Hollywood elite and that Gwyneth Paltrow didn't want to be photographed with her, or that the Netflix series Polo is a failure supposedly because of its lack of respect for animals. In this case, of horses. Nacho Figueras, one of the few Argentine, my home compatriot, Nacho Figueras, one of the few who still speaks with Meghan Markle, along with his wife Delfina Blaquier, has also been criticized. They were once seen as prototypes of demoralization that eventually backfired on them. This is a vicious cycle. It's a dog that bites its own tail. On the other hand, while in Europe the royals are being dragged through the mud and accused of murder in what physically seemed almost like an ambush, as if we were talking about the streets of Paris in the revolution of 1830. Prince Harry is linked to P. Diddy in a connection that never is fully explained or justified.
Dark secrets that are spilling out. With the news that Diddy might be going away for life, people are now questioning who else might be in line to have their private lives exposed, with the terrible things that they've done to others coming to light and potentially ruining their reputation. And at the moment, it's not just one individual under scrutiny, but it's rap's real power couple who are being placed under the microscope, as they are now facing accusations that range from behind-the-scenes political manipulation to even murder. It's your boy Luesta, and this is the disturbing alleged double life of Jay-Z and Beyonce.
This opens the door to a whole series of very popular YouTube programs that present conspiracy theories with content that is openly racist and demonizes African Americans, targeting figures like, for example, Oprah Winfrey, Beyonce, and others who happen to support Democratic candidate Kamala Harris in her fight against Donald Trump.
Two of my daughters, please welcome Kelly and Beyonce. H-Town. We are so happy to be standing here on this stage as proud country Texas women supporting and celebrating the one and only Vice President Kamala Harris.
Just yesterday, Harris lost the support of disadvantaged black men. It's telling that the demonized white CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch, accused of sexually harassing and trafficking too, was immediately released or wasn't even detained, and the case was quietly brushed over by the media, which are underfunded and rely on social networks and ad revenue. Epstein was even allowed the privilege of checking out by committing suicide, taking to the grave testimonies from friends and possibly videos featuring the likes of Donald Trump, who was accused of all kinds of crimes and offenses that this liberal Inquisition tried to impose, ultimately shooting itself in the foot. This summer, the 17-year-old son of a friend of mine during my holidays in Greece couldn't stop watching TikTok, laughing at Kamala Harris, celebrating Donald Trump, and idealizing the racist discourse spread by gamers, surprisingly some of them, or the majority of them, African American. It's as if the moral inquisition and identity politics have entered into a kind of whirlwind where the result is a collective psychosis, ultimately making the most powerful man in the world seem like the best option, while endangering sexual and immigrant minorities, highlighted by academia and progressivism, which now turn them and us into targets, and no one can defend us from. And let's see each other. This is not proper English. I see you next week. That's what I was trying to say. Bye-bye.